The afternoon sun burned low over Tokyo, washing the city in gold. Bruce Lee walked quietly down a narrow street, his black shoes clicking against the stone, his yellow training bag slung over one shoulder. The note that had arrived 2 days earlier was folded neatly inside his pocket. A formal challenge from a prestigious Japanese martial arts school. The letter had been respectful, even poetic, but between its elegant lines hid something sharper: doubt. Doubt in the name Bruce Lee, doubt in his philosophy, doubt that a man who preached fluidity and balance could ever match the iron discipline of Japan's oldest masters. As he approached the dojo, the faint rhythm of wooden swords striking echoed in the air. The building stood like a fortress of tradition. Shoji doors, incense smoke drifting through the eaves, and the faint call of a distant gong. Inside, the students were already waiting. They had heard of the Chinese man who claimed martial arts were not about style, but about expression. To them, he was a showman, a philosopher who moved fast and talked faster. The idea that he could defeat a full-blooded samurai school was unthinkable. When Bruce stepped onto the wooden floor, the murmurs began. His frame was smaller than most had imagined. His eyes, calm and sharp, studied the room. A dozen men in white gi, standing in rows like soldiers. At the far end stood Master Tanaka, a stern man with grey hair tied neatly at the back, his arms crossed. He didn't bow. Instead, he spoke through an interpreter. "So, this is the man who mocks tradition." Bruce bowed slightly, his tone even. "I do not mock tradition. I only refuse to be trapped by it." A murmur of offense rippled through the students. One of them, a young man named Hiroshi, stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Our ways built this country. Our ancestors died perfecting these techniques. You call that a trap?" Bruce didn't raise his voice. "No, I call it the past, and I respect the past, but I fight in the present." The tension thickened. Master Tanaka raised a hand, silencing his student. "In our school," he said coldly, "respect is proven with skill. If you wish to teach us, then show us what you have learned." Bruce nodded once. "With pleasure." The students moved to the edges of the mat, forming a circle. The sound of their bare feet on the wood echoed like a heartbeat. Hiroshi stepped into the center, bowing stiffly. Bruce returned the gesture. For a brief moment, all sound seemed to vanish. Then Hiroshi lunged forward, fast, sharp, disciplined. His first strike aimed for Bruce's ribs, but the air whistled empty. Bruce had already moved. He didn't block. He simply wasn't there. The crowd gasped as Bruce's counter came in a blur. A light tap on Hiroshi's shoulder, gentle but precise. Hiroshi turned, swinging again with fury. This time Bruce sidestepped, letting the young man's own momentum betray him. A simple flick of the wrist, and Hiroshi found himself face down, the air driven from his lungs. The room froze. Bruce released him immediately, bowing again. "It's not about power," he said softly. "It's about timing, awareness, and being like water." The phrase stung the room. To be like water, to these men of rigid form and hierarchy, it sounded like mockery. Master Tanaka's jaw tightened. "Enough of these riddles," he said. "You speak like a poet, but this is a house of warriors." Bruce's eyes met his. "Then let the warrior speak." The old master stepped onto the mat. His movements were measured, deliberate. His reputation reached far, undefeated in over 3 decades of competition. He bowed briefly, then assumed a low stance, the wooden floor creaking beneath his weight. Bruce mirrored him, relaxed, breathing slow, coiled like a spring. For 10 long seconds, neither man moved. Then the world erupted. Tanaka struck first, a sweeping roundhouse kick that cracked through the air. Bruce deflected with his forearm, absorbing the shock like a wave meeting rock. The old man came again, fists, elbows, knees, each attack a textbook example of precision. But Bruce was dancing with the wind. He flowed, twisted, turned, never resisting directly, always redirecting. The audience watched in disbelief as the younger man avoided every strike with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Then came the moment that would echo for decades. Tanaka feinted left and lunged forward, a perfect strike aimed at Bruce's temple. Bruce ducked, pivoted, and in less than half a second delivered a single side kick that connected squarely with Tanaka's chest. The impact sounded like a thunderclap. The master stumbled back 3 full steps, stunned not by pain but by disbelief. Silence. Bruce lowered his stance and bowed deeply. "No dishonor," he said. "Only learning." The students stared, jaws tight, eyes wide. 20 seconds. That's how long it had taken. 20 seconds to shatter the myth of immovable tradition. But Bruce didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply extended his hand to the fallen master. Tanaka, still catching his breath, looked up at the young man who had just defeated him. Slowly, he took the offered hand. "Your strength," he said between breaths, "is not in your muscles." Bruce smiled faintly. "No, it's in knowing when not to use them. It's..." For the first time that afternoon, Tanaka bowed. The students followed, some reluctantly, others with awe. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the open doors. Bruce turned toward the setting light, slinging his training bag over his shoulder once again. He didn't look back. For him, it had never been about victory. It was about truth. And the truth had just begun to spread. By the next morning, word had spread across Tokyo like wildfire. In dojos, tea houses, and newspapers, people whispered the same sentence. The foreigner defeated Master Tanaka in 20 seconds. Some dismissed it as rumor, others laughed in disbelief. But those who had been there, the students who watched Bruce move like a shadow, spoke with trembling voices. They said it wasn't strength that had won. It was something else, something they couldn't name. Bruce Lee, meanwhile, was quietly sipping tea in a small ryokan on the city's edge. He wasn't celebrating. He was reflecting. His philosophy had always been simple: to express oneself honestly through movement. Yet the world kept demanding proof through violence. Why must truth always bleed before it is believed? He murmured to himself. The door slid open, revealing a young reporter, nervous but eager. "Mr. Lee," she said in halting English, "everyone in Tokyo is talking about you. They say you humiliated Japan's most respected master." Bruce set his cup down calmly. "Humiliated? No, I only opened a window. What they choose to see through it is up to them." "But they're angry," she insisted. "Other schools want to challenge you now. They say you disrespected their honor." Bruce smiled faintly. "Honor is not something that can be lost by losing a fight. It's lost when one stops learning." That afternoon, Bruce stepped out into the crowded city streets. He walked past noodle stands, neon signs, and curious stares. In a nearby park, a group of young martial artists were practicing. One of them recognized him and froze mid-kick. "Are you Bruce Lee?" the boy asked, breathless. Bruce nodded slightly. "Keep training," he said. "Don't try to be me, try to be you." The boy blinked. "But you're the best." Bruce laughed softly. "The best at being Bruce Lee, maybe. But if you try to copy me, the world will only ever have one original and one poor imitation." It was that kind of thinking that made people either love him or hate him. To the old guard, he was a threat. A man who dared to say that all styles were one. To the young, he was freedom personified. And in that growing tension between generations, something powerful was brewing. 2 days later, an invitation arrived at Bruce's inn. It was written in black ink, sealed with a crimson crest. The letter came from the Shinjuku Martial Brotherhood, an elite federation of Japanese masters who had dedicated their lives to preserving ancient forms of combat. The message was clear. You are invited to a public exhibition match to demonstrate your philosophy. Refusal will be taken as dishonor. Bruce looked at the letter for a long moment. He knew what it meant. Another test, another spectacle. But this one would be different. The Brotherhood was known for their ruthlessness and pride. Accepting could mean serious injury, maybe even death. Refusing would mean the end of his credibility in Asia. He folded the letter quietly and whispered, "Then the lesson must continue." The match was scheduled for 3 days later in an old temple courtyard at the edge of the city. Word spread beyond Japan. Cameras from Hong Kong and the United States arrived. The crowd would number in the thousands, students, skeptics, and believers, all eager to see the man who had bent time and tradition in a single kick. The morning of the exhibition, the air felt charged. A thin mist covered the ground. Cherry blossoms fluttered down like pink snow as Bruce entered the courtyard in his simple black uniform. Across from him stood 3 fighters, each a representative of a different Japanese art: karate, judo, and kendo. They bowed stiffly, their eyes cold. A voice over the loudspeaker announced the rules. Each fighter will face the challenger in sequence. No rounds, no breaks. The match ends when the judges declare it so. The crowd roared. Bruce simply adjusted his stance, light on his feet, calm as still water. The first opponent, a karate master named Daigo, attacked with the power of a bull. His punches cracked the air, sharp and deliberate. But Bruce didn't meet them head-on. He redirected, flowed, adapted. Within seconds, Daigo found himself striking at shadows. Bruce's counter came like lightning, a palm strike to the chest that stopped just short of impact. Daigo froze. He knew, had it landed, the fight would be over. Bruce bowed and stepped back. "Thank you," he said softly. The second challenger was taller, a judo master named Kenji. He moved with the precision of a serpent, hands eager to grab, twist, and throw. He lunged, catching Bruce's sleeve, but instead of resisting, Bruce rolled with the motion, using Kenji's own strength to unbalance him. In a single, graceful movement, Bruce shifted, pivoted, and gently placed the master flat on his back. The crowd gasped. Bruce offered his hand to help him up, but Kenji shook his head, stunned, muttering, "Impossible." Now came the third, the kendo master, Yamamoto. He wore a dark mask, his wooden sword gleaming in the morning light. The air seemed to hum as he stepped forward. This was no sparring match. It was a duel of wills. When the whistle blew, Yamamoto charged, his strikes slicing through the mist. The crack, crack, crack of bamboo against air was deafening. Bruce weaved through it, barely an inch away each time, his movements so fast that some swore they saw 2 of him. Then, with one fluid motion, Bruce stepped inside the strike and stopped, his fingertips resting lightly against Yamamoto's throat, just below the mask. The sword froze mid-swing, time seemed to hold its breath. Then Bruce lowered his hand and bowed. The entire courtyard erupted in stunned silence. For several seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, Yamamoto removed his mask and dropped to one knee. "Your technique has no name," he said quietly, "but your spirit has no equal." Bruce smiled faintly. "It has a name," he said. "The name is honesty." The crowd burst into applause, not of triumph, but of awe. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Bruce only bowed to the audience. "Martial arts," he said, "is not about fighting others. It is about conquering yourself." As he walked out of the courtyard, someone called after him. It was the young boy from the park, running breathlessly through the crowd. "Mr. Lee!" he shouted. "Did you win?" Bruce paused and turned, smiling gently. "I didn't come to win," he said. "I came to wake people up." The boy tilted his head. "To what?" Bruce looked up at the fading sun. "To their own power." And as he disappeared into the mist, the whispers began again, not of challenge, not of anger, but of respect. The storm he had sparked no longer threatened to destroy tradition. It was reshaping it. Days turned into weeks, but the echoes of that match refused to fade. Across Japan, students began questioning their rigid drills. Teachers began studying Bruce's fluid movements, and even old masters sat quietly at night, replaying the image of one man who had moved through their strongest fighters without cruelty, without pride, and without fear. Newspapers called him the man who danced with blades. Others called him a heretic. But beneath the debate, something deeper had begun to stir. The sense that perhaps tradition wasn't about walls, but about roots that could grow in any direction. Bruce, however, had already left Tokyo. He walked alone through the countryside, along rivers and under the whispering pines, searching for silence. For him, victory meant nothing if it didn't lead to growth. Fame was noise, and noise, he knew, was the enemy of clarity. One night, he stopped in a small mountain village. There was a single inn, old and quiet, with tatami floors that creaked like memory. The owner, an elderly man named Shigeru, recognized him immediately, but said nothing until after dinner. "You remind me," Shigeru said softly, pouring tea, "of a man I once knew. He fought like the wind, gentle until he chose to roar." Bruce smiled faintly. "And what happened to him?" "He stopped fighting others," Shigeru replied, "and began fighting himself. That's when he finally won." That line lingered in Bruce's mind long after the candles went out. He thought of his father, of his students back home, of every punch thrown in anger and every bruise earned in pride. He thought of how many men had tried to build cages around something that was born to flow, and how in the end every cage breaks from the inside. The next morning, as the mist lifted, Bruce began training outside the inn. His movements were slow at first, deliberate, a dance between muscle and breath. Villagers gathered at a distance, watching silently. Children copied his stances. Old men nodded in rhythm. He wasn't performing. He was teaching without speaking. By the time he finished, sweat shimmered on his skin like morning dew, and a small crowd had formed. Among them stood a familiar face. Hiroshi, the hot-headed student he had defeated weeks earlier. "Master Lee," Hiroshi said, bowing deeply, "I came to find you." Bruce looked at him, surprised. "To fight again?" Hiroshi shook his head. "No, to learn." There was humility in his voice that hadn't been there before. He dropped to his knees. "I thought you insulted us," he said. "I was wrong. You were showing us what we'd forgotten, that strength without understanding is just noise." Bruce's gaze softened. "You've already begun learning," he said. "The moment you stopped defending your pride, you started defending your truth." For days, Hiroshi stayed in the village, training with Bruce at dawn and meditating with him at dusk. Their sessions were different, less about combat, more about connection. Bruce would ask him to mimic the movement of wind, the stillness of water, the sudden snap of a branch breaking in the forest. "Do not move against the world," he said one evening as the sunset burned orange. "Move with it. The universe is your opponent and your ally at the same time. That's the secret every fighter must learn." Meanwhile, word reached Master Tanaka, who had spent those weeks in solitude, nursing both his bruised ribs and his shaken beliefs. One morning, unable to resist the pull of curiosity, he journeyed to the same village. When he arrived, he found Bruce and Hiroshi sparring barefoot in the field, the teacher and the student moving as one, flowing like wind and echo. Tanaka watched in silence until Bruce noticed him. "Master Tanaka," Bruce said, bowing respectfully. "I didn't expect a visit." The older man smiled faintly. "Nor did I expect to lose to a man half my age, but the gods enjoy surprises." He approached slowly, studying Bruce's movements with a renewed gaze. "You were right," Tanaka said at last. "Tradition became my prison. I guarded the gates so fiercely that I forgot what they were built to protect." Bruce bowed deeply. "Tradition is beautiful," he said, "but when it stops us from growing, it stops being tradition and becomes imitation." For a long time, the two men stood together in silence. Then Tanaka placed his hand on Hiroshi's shoulder. "If he is your student now," he said, "then perhaps one day he will be mine again. But not to repeat my lessons, to rewrite them." That evening, under a canopy of stars, the villagers gathered for a farewell dinner. There was laughter, warmth, and quiet respect. Tanaka poured sake for Bruce and raised his cup. "You came as a challenger," he said. "You leave as a bridge." Bruce shook his head gently. "No, sensei. I'm just a mirror. I showed what was already inside you." The old master smiled, humbled. Then the reflection was worth the pain. As the fire crackled, Hiroshi asked the question everyone was thinking. "Master Lee, what will you do now?" Bruce looked into the flames for a moment before answering. "Keep moving. The water that stops flowing becomes stagnant. There are still too many walls in the world that mistake stillness for strength." The next morning, he left before dawn. The air was cool, the horizon pale with the first light of day. Behind him, the village slept peacefully. But the world had changed. Students across Japan were blending techniques for the first time. Old masters were meditating beside their students, not above them. The wave had begun. As Bruce walked down the mountain path, a single thought filled his mind. Not of victory, nor of fame, but of purpose. Every challenge, every humiliation, every bruise had been necessary to open this door. Because true mastery, he now understood, wasn't about defeating others. It was about freeing them. At the mountain's edge, he turned one last time and whispered, "Be water, my friend." The wind carried his words down to the valley below, where they would echo for generations, not as legend, but as truth. Greatness isn't born from pride, but from humility. True strength isn't in domination, but in understanding. And the highest victory is not when others bow to you. It is when they rise because of you. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect, to like, to share, and to subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone still needs to hear that discipline and kindness can walk the same path. Tell me, what would you have learned from Bruce Lee that day?